You can't bring Mom back, but my wife's birthday is only once a year. That wasn't just the moment my heart broke. It was the moment something inside me began to calcify. I stood in the hallway of our home, adjusting my black tie for the third time. The house felt empty, sterile. No humming from the kitchen, no soft footsteps on the hardwood floors. Margaret was everywhere, and nowhere at once. Her coffee mug still sat on the counter, a faint lipstick stain on the rim that I couldn't bring myself to wash away. Her reading glasses rested by the sink, as if she'd just set them down to answer the phone. This house wasn't a home anymore. It was a museum of memories that cut like glass every time I walked past them. I clutched the funeral program in my hands, my eyes lingering on Lucas's name, listed as a pallbearer. Our only son, the one we'd sacrificed everything for. At 8:30, I dialed his number. The phone rang 4 times before he picked up, and immediately I heard chaos in the background. Music, shouting, the clatter of what sounded like party preparations. "Dad?" Lucas answered, his voice groggy and irritated. "What's up?" "The funeral is at 11:30, I said, keeping my voice steady. There was a pause, then a sigh. "Dad, I told you yesterday. Jenna's birthday party is tonight. We've got caterers coming, the band is setting up, and guests are flying in from all over." My grip tightened on the receiver. "Your mother's funeral is today, Lucas." "I know that," he said, his tone dismissive, casual, as if we were discussing a minor schedule conflict. "But she's not coming back, Dad. Jenna's birthday? That only happens once a year." My hand trembled as I held the phone. My eyes darted toward Margaret's things, her sweater draped over the dining room chair, the novel she would never finish on the side table. 39 years of marriage reduced to artifacts. I ended the call without another word, as Lucas's voice faded into laughter and party noise. For 3 full minutes, I sat in complete stillness, the only sound the relentless ticking of the grandfather clock Margaret had inherited from her parents. 8:47. With slow, deliberate strokes, I took out my pen and crossed Lucas's name off the funeral program. The cemetery was cool that morning. 26 people showed up. Neighbors, Margaret's friends, our old church group. Dorothy, Margaret's sister, kept whispering the same question. "Where's Lucas?" Each time I responded politely. He had a commitment. But the emptiness beside me at the casket was unmistakable. That was Lucas's spot, the spot where a son should stand for his mother. I kept remembering how Margaret defended him even during her chemotherapy. "He's just overwhelmed," she'd say weakly from her hospital bed. "Young couples need space." She'd make excuses while the poison dripped into her veins, fighting a battle our son couldn't be bothered to witness. The pastor spoke of eternal love as they lowered my wife into the ground. My face remained expressionless, a mask of stone that hid the turmoil beneath. I drove home alone in Margaret's Honda. She always insisted I use it instead of my truck. Better for the environment, she'd say. Her classical music station came on automatically. I shut it off mid-note. Our driveway had never seemed so long. I sat in the car for a while after parking, gathering the strength to enter a house that would never again contain her laughter. Everything was untouched inside. The curtains she hated still hung in the living room. I never had time to change them like I'd promised. Our wedding photo greeted me in the entryway. Margaret at 23, beautiful and glowing, full of hope for our future together. I remembered the sacrifices, Margaret waitressing double shifts while I built Whitmore and Sons from nothing. We gave everything so Lucas could have advantages we never had. That night, in our bedroom, I opened her nightstand. Inside was her Bible, bookmarks placed throughout Psalms. A folded letter fell out as I lifted it. Her handwriting was shaky but determined. "My dearest Alan, please don't let Lucas forget us. We gave him everything. I hope that was enough." I sat on our bed, haunted by her words. In the closet, I found a dusty cardboard box labeled Lucas School. Inside were kindergarten report cards, handmade birthday cards, graduation photos. Each item had Margaret's tiny notes attached. So proud of him. Lucas said his first full sentence today. He's our future. One card, drawn in crayon when Lucas was 8, declared, "Best mom ever." I began questioning everything. Why did Lucas turn out like this? Why was Margaret always defending him while I stayed silent? My grief was transforming into something else. Bitterness at first, then something harder and colder. Resolve. At 9:41, my phone rang again. Lucas's name flashed on the screen. I hesitated, then answered. "Hey, Dad," he said brightly, as if nothing had happened. "Listen, I need to ask you for something. We kinda went overboard on Jenna's birthday." He said it like I'd forgotten he'd skipped his mother's funeral to throw that party. Lucas's voice was upbeat on the phone, casually chatting as if we were discussing the weather rather than the first conversation after he'd missed his own mother's burial. "Party was amazing, Dad. Everyone loved it. The champagne fountain was a hit." I remained silent, waiting for what I knew was coming. Lucas never called unless he wanted something. "So, we're a little short right now," he continued, his tone shifting to what he probably thought was persuasive. "Just need $16,000 to cover the band, the steakhouse dinner, Jenna's bracelet, and the limo. You know how it all adds up." I stared at Margaret's empty chair across from me, her absence an ache that never subsided. "Jenna's been really stressed about the bills," Lucas added. "She deserves it all. You know how she gets when money's tight." The audacity stunned me. Here I was, sitting alone in the house where his mother had died just days ago, and he was calling about party expenses. "Lucas," I said quietly, "we buried your mother yesterday." He sighed impatiently. "Look, she's gone, but we're still here. You always said family comes first." The casual dismissal of Margaret, of everything she'd meant, everything she'd done, made something inside me harden. "I'm not giving you a dime," I said. There was a long pause. I could almost see Lucas's entitled expression contorting into surprise. "What the hell do you mean?" he finally responded. "I mean no." Those two words, so simple, yet I'd never really said them to him before. Not when it mattered. "Dad," Lucas's voice shifted, adopting the manipulative tone I'd heard countless times. "You've always supported me. That's what parents do." He began listing past favors, as if they were transactional rather than sacrificial. "College, the house, the wedding. You helped because you love me. That's what this is about, right? Love?" My patience evaporated, like morning dew under a merciless sun. "That wasn't help, Lucas. That was sacrifice. Your mother and I sacrificed our dreams, our retirement, our peace of mind. And yesterday, you couldn't sacrifice one party for her funeral." "You're being petty," he spat. "Mom would be ashamed of you." The mention of Margaret in that context ignited something primal inside me. "She was ashamed of you," I said, my voice low but firm. She just never said it aloud. After hanging up, I walked to my office and pulled open the filing cabinet. Inside were folders meticulously labeled Lucas, College, Lucas House, Lucas Car, Lucas Europe, Lucas Loans. I spread them across my desk, a paper trail of devotion and disappointment. The total sum was staggering. $895,000 over 15 years. Nearly $1 million that could have given Margaret better medical care, more comfortable final years, maybe even early retirement where we could have traveled like we'd always dreamed. But the financial burden paled in comparison to what I found next. In Margaret's nightstand was her own notebook, one I'd never seen before. Inside, she'd tracked what I can only call emotional debts. Postponed mammogram. Lucas needed rent help. No anniversary gift this year. Bought Lucas a new suit for job interview. Skipped cancer support group. Lucas needed a ride when his car broke down. Each entry stabbed deeper than the last. How many appointments had she missed? How much care had she delayed? The devastating possibility that earlier treatment might have saved her life hung in the air, like a specter. I thought about my own father. Strict, unyielding, never giving a cent. I'd left home at 17 with $20 and a toolbox, determined to be different, to be better. Had I overcorrected so drastically that I'd raised a son who saw us as nothing more than a resource to be drained? Lucas called back an hour later, his voice now tight with anger. "If you won't help us, don't expect to see much of us," he threatened. "That's your choice," I replied, surprised by my own calmness. "Unbelievable. You're really cutting your son off?" I looked at Margaret's photo on my desk. Her kind eyes seemed to hold both sorrow and understanding. "I just buried my wife," I said quietly. "And my illusions about you." That night, I sat at my desk with only the banker's lamp illuminating my work. I opened my calculator app and spreadsheets. For hours, I cross-referenced every withdrawal, transfer, and expense related to Lucas over the years. 47 individual financial supports, nearly $1 million that could have been our retirement, our dreams, Margaret's extended care. Beside me, I started a new folder. On its tab, I wrote in bold letters, "Full Separation Plan." In the quiet of that night, with Margaret's presence somehow still lingering in the house, I made a vow. Not just to her memory, but to myself. I'd made excuses. She'd made sacrifices. He made demands. That era ends tonight. I placed Margaret's photo on the desk as a silent witness and began listing steps with methodical precision. Legal consultation, employment records, estate documents, financial separations. Each item was a step toward reclaiming what was left of my life and honoring what Margaret and I had built together. This wasn't about revenge. It was about justice, about consequences for choices made. The last item on my list was the hardest to write, but perhaps the most necessary. I reached into the cabinet and pulled out Lucas's employee file from Whitmore & Sons, the construction company Margaret and I had built from nothing, that Lucas had expected to inherit without earning it. I grabbed a red pen and wrote the first word on a fresh page: termination. The next morning, I arrived at the office before anyone else. The building was quiet, with only the hum of the air conditioning and the occasional distant sound of early traffic. I'd always loved this building. Every brick, every beam represented years of hard work. Margaret had been there for the groundbreaking, champagne in hand, her smile brighter than the sun. "This is our legacy," she'd said. Legacy. The word had haunted me since her diagnosis. What kind of legacy were we really leaving? A business empire for an entitled son who couldn't be bothered to attend his mother's funeral? I placed Lucas's file on my desk and began reviewing years of second chances. Deadlines missed, client meetings skipped, expense reports that raised eyebrows, contractors who'd complained that Lucas was never on site when he should have been. At 7:30, I called Sarah Mitchell, our HR director, into my office. She arrived carrying her own thick file, labeled Lucas Whitmore, Internal Incidents. The look on her face told me she'd been waiting for this day. "We're moving forward," I told her. "Today." Sarah nodded, her expression a mixture of relief and professionalism. "I'll prepare the termination paperwork. Standard protocol would include a security escort. No prior warning for managerial terminations." "Do it by the book," I said. "Exactly as we would for anyone else." As she left to make arrangements, I took one last look at Margaret's photo on my desk. "This is for both of us," I whispered. He walked into the office 15 minutes late, bragging about recovering from the party that replaced his mother's funeral, and I was waiting with his severance, which was 0. I arrived at Whitmore & Sons Construction at 6:45 that morning, a full 2 hours before most employees would start trickling in. The early morning quiet felt appropriate for what I needed to do. I brought Margaret's photo from my desk at home and placed it on my office desk, a silent witness to what was about to unfold. One by one, I laid out Lucas's project reports, expense logs, and internal complaints across my desk. Each document told the same story: years of leniency, of looking the other way, of making excuses, deadlines routinely missed, client meetings skipped without notice, expense reports that would have gotten any other employee terminated years ago, contractors who'd given up complaining that the boss's son was never on site when he should have been. At 7:30 sharp, Sarah Mitchell knocked on my door. Our HR director had been with the company for 15 years, longer than Lucas had been an employee. She carried a thick file labeled Lucas Whitmore, Internal Incidents, and placed it beside the others. "I've been documenting everything for over a year," she said quietly. "Just waiting for you to be ready." I nodded, grateful for her foresight. "We're moving forward. Today." Sarah's face showed momentary relief before returning to professional neutrality. She prepared the termination paperwork efficiently, then made a call to arrange for security to be on standby. "Standard protocol," she assured me. "No prior warning for managerial terminations, just like we would handle any other executive position." I appreciated her treating this like any other firing, because that's what it needed to be. Professional by the book, no special treatment. The office slowly came to life around us. I heard the coffee machine gurgling in the break room, phones beginning to ring, the elevator chiming as more employees arrived. And then, at 9:15, 15 minutes after he was supposed to start work, I heard Lucas's distinctive laugh echoing down the hallway. Through my open door, I watched him stroll in, stopping to chat with our receptionist, Jennifer. "Man, what a weekend," he said loudly enough for half the office to hear. "Jenna really went all out for her birthday. I'm still recovering." He grabbed coffee from the break room, checked his phone, pulled up what looked like fantasy football scores on his computer. All while on the company clock. All while being paid a 6-figure salary that Margaret and I had argued about countless times. I pressed the intercom button on my phone. "Lucas, please come to my office. Now." When he walked in, he was still smiling until he saw Sarah Mitchell standing beside my desk and Mike Thompson, our security officer, by the door. "What's all this?" Lucas laughed nervously. "Some kind of weird staff meeting?" Without a word, I slid the termination packet across my desk. "Your employment is terminated effective immediately," I said, my voice steady. "Please read and sign." Lucas's grin faltered, then vanished entirely. He looked from me to Sarah, then back again, as if waiting for the punchline. "Is this a joke?" he asked, not touching the paperwork. "Read it," I said. He glanced down at the first page, his face flushing. "Is this about the money? The funeral?" His voice rose slightly. "You're firing me because I didn't go to Mom's funeral?" I kept my expression neutral. "This is about your work performance. 8 years of negligence. You've been protected too long." "Protected?" Lucas scoffed. "I'm your son. This is a family business." "You're not family right now," I replied coldly. "You're an employee underperforming at a 6-figure salary." Lucas's face contorted through a range of emotions: shock, anger, disbelief. Then he tried a different angle. "Mom wouldn't want this," he said softly, his voice suddenly gentle. "She believed in family sticking together." The mention of Margaret in his manipulative attempt ignited something fierce inside me. "You weren't there when she died. Don't pretend now. Dad, be reasonable. Sign the papers, Lucas." When he refused again, I hit the security call button. Mike Thompson stepped forward, quiet but firm in his presence. Please escort Mr. Whitmore to his desk to collect personal belongings, then to the exit, I instructed. The walk through the office was exactly what I'd anticipated. Painful, public, necessary. Staff members stopped typing mid-sentence. Conversations halted. Heads turned to watch the boss's son being escorted out like any other terminated employee. Lucas tried once more, his voice now desperate. "Dad, please. Let's talk in private." I met his eyes. "We're done talking, Lucas." 20 minutes later, just as I was finishing a call with our largest client, Jenna burst into the building. I could hear her heels echoing across the marble lobby before I saw her. Her hair was unkempt, makeup smudged. Clearly she'd rushed over as soon as Lucas had called her. She pushed past Jennifer at reception, ignored Sarah's attempt to stop her, and stormed into my office uninvited, Lucas trailing behind her. "You've humiliated my husband," she shouted, slamming her designer handbag onto a chair. "How dare you? We have a lifestyle to maintain." I remained seated, expressionless. Lucas was an employee who consistently failed to meet performance standards. "He's your son," she shouted, as if I needed the reminder. "That doesn't entitle him to lifetime employment with no accountability." Jenna's perfectly manicured finger jabbed toward me. "We want 6-month severance. We'll sue if we don't get it." I leaned back in my chair. Lucas was employed at will. No contract. No severance. Her face flushed with anger. "You can't do this to us." "It's already done." Lucas stood behind her, saying nothing, his eyes darting between us. "There's something else you should know," I added, opening my desk drawer. "Margaret's estate was rewritten before she passed. Lucas gets nothing." The shock on both their faces would have been comical in any other context. "You can't cut us out like that!" Jenna's voice rose to near hysteria. "We didn't," I replied calmly. "She did, with good reason." Jenna's rage exploded. "This is abuse! This is theft!" I pressed the security button again. "This is consequences." 2 guards arrived promptly. As they escorted Jenna out, her shouts echoed through the office. "You'll regret this, old man." When they were gone, I sat in the silence of my office. The confrontation had drained me, but I felt no regret, just a strange calm, like the eye of a hurricane. I took Lucas's framed employee photo off the wall, the one from the Meet Our Team display in the lobby, and placed it face down in a drawer. Then I opened another locked drawer and removed a folder I'd prepared the night before, labeled Estate Restructure, Robert Chen. It was time for the next phase. That evening, as I drove home, I passed Lucas and Jenna's house, the 5-bedroom McMansion in Oakwood Estates that Margaret and I had helped with the down payment on as a wedding gift. Lights blazed from every window, and I could see shadows moving frantically inside. They were probably figuring out how to maintain their lifestyle without Lucas's income. For the first time since Margaret's death, I felt something close to peace. Not happiness, that would take longer to find again, but the quiet satisfaction of finally doing what needed to be done, of honoring Margaret's memory, not just with words, but with actions. She had always been the forgiving one, the one who made excuses for Lucas, who insisted on giving him chance after chance. And where had it gotten her? A son who couldn't be bothered to attend her funeral. As I pulled into my driveway, I noticed Margaret's roses needed pruning. She'd always tended them herself, refusing my offers to hire a gardener. "Some things you do with your own hands," she'd say, "out of love." Tomorrow I would meet with Robert Chen. Tomorrow we would begin restructuring everything. But tonight I would prune her roses. Some things you do with your own hands, out of justice. They took everything I built for granted. So I started taking it back, one document at a time. The following morning, I met Robert Chen at his downtown office. Robert wasn't just our family attorney. He'd been my friend for 30 years. He was there when I opened Whitmore & Sons. He'd drafted our first contracts. He'd helped Margaret and me buy our first home, and he'd been at her funeral, unlike our son. I brought everything with me: Margaret's will, business ownership documents, trust plans, insurance policies, and spread them across his mahogany conference table. "I want to erase Lucas from every part of my legacy," I said. Robert didn't flinch. He'd known me long enough to understand I never made decisions like this lightly. "Tell me what you want to do," he said simply. For the next 3 hours, we reconstructed the future. We drafted the formation of the Margaret Whitmore Memorial Foundation, dedicated to what actually mattered to her: scholarships for nursing students, cancer research, community programs for families in need. "The business assets move into an irrevocable trust," I instructed. "The house will be sold. Proceeds go to the foundation." Robert took notes, occasionally asking questions to clarify my intentions. "What about Margaret's jewelry?" he asked. "The wedding ring?" "I want it buried with me when the time comes." He nodded, making another note. "And Lucas?" "Lucas and any future children are explicitly excluded from the estate." Robert stopped writing and looked up at me. "Alan, I need to ask. Are you sure about this? Once we file these changes, they'll be difficult to undo." I met his gaze. "I've never been more certain of anything." He nodded and continued drafting. By noon, we had the framework for Margaret's true legacy, not the one our son had squandered, but the one that would honor her kindness, her generosity, her selflessness. As I drove back home, I made a mental list of all the financial connections that still tied me to Lucas and Jenna: the mortgage I'd guaranteed, the credit cards I'd co-signed, the insurance policies I paid for. All of it had to go. Over the next week, I sent notices systematically: to Whitmore Bank, revoking my guarantee on Lucas's mortgage; to American Express, Chase, and Nordstrom, removing my name from co-signed credit accounts; to auto insurance and car loan companies, canceling the auto-pay transfers from my accounts; to the banks, freezing joint accounts Lucas still had access to. I said nothing publicly. There was no need. In a town like Porterville, news travels on its own current. Within days, the ripples began to show. Jenna was quietly uninvited from her yoga class and the Friday brunch club. Lucas's regular golf foursome suddenly had no room for him. Jenna's credit card was declined at Bergdorf's department store, where Margaret had been a loyal customer for decades. Her salon mysteriously canceled her standing appointments. When the local newspaper ran a piece about Margaret's community work, they mentioned the notable absences at her funeral. They didn't name Lucas, but everyone in town knew exactly who they meant. The professional fallout was equally swift. Lucas's phone stopped ringing. Interview requests disappeared. Past clients stopped returning his calls. Real estate agents mysteriously forgot to schedule home viewings when he and Jenna started looking for a more affordable place. Jenna posted a rant on social media about being ghosted by the entire city, and the comment section filled with people who remembered how she'd treated Margaret during her illness, the missed hospital visits, the complaints about having to adjust their vacation plans, the time she'd asked if Margaret could hurry up with the chemo because they needed her to watch their dog. I took no pleasure in their difficulties. This wasn't about revenge. It was about removing myself and Margaret's memory from their toxic orbit. 2 weeks after Lucas's termination, I received an alert from the bank. First missed mortgage payment on their house, then a second. Utility companies began shutting off services. The BMW Jenna had insisted on leasing was repossessed in broad daylight, with neighbors discreetly recording the scene from their windows. That evening, I drove past their house. Through the window, I could see Jenna screaming at Lucas, her gestures wild and accusatory. "You destroyed our life." "No," I thought. "You did that yourselves." The next weekend, they held a garage sale. Designer shoes, unused wedding gifts, jewelry, golf clubs, electronics, high-end cookware, all spread across their manicured lawn like the scattered remnants of a lifestyle built on sand. Everything went for pennies on the dollar. Most neighbors didn't even stop to browse. A week later, Sarah Mitchell came into my office with an unexpected piece of news. "Jenna's moved out," she said. "She's living with Thomas Becker now." The name was familiar. Her ex-boyfriend? The restaurant chain owner? Sarah nodded. Apparently, she reached out to him when things started getting difficult. Lucas is still in the house, but it's half empty now. He's applied for jobs at the gas station and the supermarket. I felt nothing at this news. No satisfaction. No pity. Just a distant acknowledgement, like hearing about strangers in another town. "Thank you for letting me know," I said, returning to my paperwork. That evening, as I tended Margaret's roses, I thought about legacy. Not just the financial kind, but the deeper inheritance we leave. Values, principles, character. Somewhere along the way, we'd failed to instill those things in Lucas. Or perhaps we had, and he'd chosen to reject them. Either way, the result was the same. At 8 o'clock the next morning, I received a call from Whitmore Bank. "Mr. Whitmore, Lucas and Jenna's mortgage is now 60 days overdue. You're still listed as a guarantor on some of the paperwork." "Not for long," I replied. "I've submitted the removal forms." "Yes, sir, but until those are processed, there's a potential liability issue." I thought for a moment. "Schedule a foreclosure meeting. I'll be there." After hanging up, I called Robert Chen again. It was time for the next phase. "I want to buy their house at the foreclosure auction," I told him. There was a pause on the line. "May I ask why?" "Because I paid for half of it already. And because they need to understand that actions have consequences." Robert sighed. "Alan, this is starting to feel personal." "It is personal," I replied, "but that doesn't make it wrong." We discussed the legal strategy. To avoid complications, we would form a shell company, Mitchell Holdings LLC, named after Sarah, to act as the purchaser on my behalf. Sarah would attend the auction and place the bids. I would provide the financing. "The mortgage balance is $317,000, I told Robert. "That's our maximum bid." As I hung up, I glanced at Margaret's photo on my desk. "I know what you're thinking," I said quietly to her image. "That I'm being too harsh, that he's still our son." Her kind eyes seemed to hold both sadness and understanding. "But you protected him too long, Margaret. You sheltered him from consequences. And look what it made him." The days leading up to the foreclosure auction passed quickly. I buried myself in work, expanding Whitmore and Sons into new territories, securing contracts that would ensure the company's future long after I was gone. The Margaret Whitmore Memorial Foundation was taking shape, with scholarship applications already coming in for the next academic year. I was building something new from the ashes of what we'd lost, not just for myself, but for Margaret's memory, for the legacy she deserved. The night before the auction, I drove past Lucas and Jenna's house one last time. Most of the windows were dark. A single light burned in what had been their home office. Through the window, I could see Lucas sitting alone, head in his hands. For a brief moment, I felt a flicker of the old paternal instinct, the urge to help, to fix, to make things right for my child. But it passed quickly. He wasn't a child anymore. He was a 35-year-old man who had made his choices. Tomorrow, he would face the consequences of those choices. And so would I. Their dream house was on the auction block. They thought it would be humiliating to lose it to strangers. They didn't realize the stranger was me. The morning of the foreclosure auction dawned clear and cold. I'd barely slept, not from doubt, but from a strange, quiet anticipation. This wasn't about cruelty. It was about closing a chapter properly. I met Sarah Mitchell for breakfast at the diner across from the courthouse. We reviewed our strategy one final time. "Remember," I told her. "Our maximum bid is $317,000. That covers the remaining mortgage balance exactly." Sarah nodded, professional as always. "And if someone outbids us, then they get the house," I said simply. "This isn't about winning at all costs. It's about fair consequences." She studied me for a moment. "You know they'll be there." "I'm counting on it." By 9:30, a small crowd had gathered on the courthouse steps. Most were investors looking for bargains, a few real estate agents representing clients, and some curious onlookers drawn by the prospect of witnessing someone else's misfortune. I parked my sedan across the street, watching. Sarah positioned herself among the bidders, dressed in a navy blue business suit, looking like any other professional. Then I saw them, Lucas and Jenna, standing off to the side, wearing sunglasses despite the overcast day. Jenna kept scanning the crowd nervously, as if afraid of recognizing someone. Lucas was on his phone, pacing back and forth, his movements agitated. The county auctioneer, a balding man with a monotone voice, began with the standard legal preamble. Property address, reason for foreclosure, starting bid. The words echoed across the courthouse steps, each one another nail in the coffin of the life Lucas and Jenna had built on entitlement and excess. "Opening bid starts at $280,000, the auctioneer announced. A real estate investor raised his hand. $280. Sarah waited a beat, then raised her hand calmly. $290. Back and forth the bidding went. I watched Lucas's face as the price climbed. With each increase, his expression grew more desperate. He wasn't just losing a house. He was losing the last tangible symbol of the privileged life he'd believed was his birthright. $315, Sarah said, her voice confident and clear. The investor hesitated, then nodded. $316. $317, Sarah countered immediately. The investor shook his head. He was out. $317,000 going once, the auctioneer called. Going twice. Sold to Mitchell Holdings LLC. Lucas's head snapped up. "Mitchell," I heard him say. "Wait, who's that?" Jenna grabbed his arm. "I've never heard of that company." I stepped out of my car and began walking toward them as Sarah signed the paperwork. Robert Chen approached from the side, nodding subtly at Sarah. His presence, as my longtime attorney, was all Lucas needed to connect the dots. "That's Dad's lawyer," he said, loud enough for me to hear as I approached. Jenna gasped. He wouldn't. He couldn't. But I had, and I was now standing before them, my expression calm, my emotions carefully contained. "You can't do this," Lucas said, his voice cracking. "This was Mom's house, too. She helped pay for it." "She's not here to see what you turned it into," I replied. Jenna lunged forward, her hand raised as if to strike me. A courthouse security officer quickly intervened, stepping between us. "This isn't theft," I said quietly. "It's consequences." "You'll regret this," Jenna screamed, her designer sunglasses slipping down her nose, revealing mascara-streaked eyes. "We'll sue you into the ground." Robert Chen stepped forward, calmly presenting documentation showing the legal chain of custody. "Everything is in order. Mitchell Holdings LLC is the legal owner of the property as of today." "You have 14 days to vacate," I told them. "Standard procedure." I turned and walked away, leaving them shouting on the courthouse steps. Around them, people who had gathered to witness the auction whispered among themselves. The story would be all over town by dinner. 2 weeks later, I drove past the house. A moving truck sat in the driveway, not a professional moving company, but a rented U-Haul. Through the windows, I could see Jenna throwing clothes into trash bags, her gestures frantic and angry. Lucas stood in the living room, clutching something small in his hands, a crystal vase that had belonged to Margaret, one of the wedding gifts we'd given them. No one from the neighborhood was there to help, no friends offering support. They were alone, just as Margaret had been alone during so many of her treatments when Lucas and Jenna had been too busy to drive her to chemotherapy. That night, the lights went off in the house for the last time under their ownership. The next morning, I met with the Ramirez family, a hard-working immigrant couple with 2 children and a baby on the way. Mr. Ramirez worked as a nurse at the same hospital where Margaret had received treatment. His wife was studying to become a teacher. "The house is yours at cost," I told them, handing over the keys. "The Margaret Whitmore Foundation will hold the mortgage at 2% interest." Mrs. Ramirez's eyes filled with tears. "Why us? We never thought we could afford a house in this neighborhood." "Because you represent everything my wife believed in," I said simply. "Hard work, family, compassion." I watched from my car as their children ran barefoot through the garden that weekend. Mr. Ramirez was already tending to the roses, the same varieties Margaret had planted in our garden. There was a symmetry to it that felt right. A house that had been filled with entitlement and resentment would now be filled with gratitude and love. 3 days later, my phone rang with a blocked number. I let it go to voicemail. Then another call came, and another. Finally, I listened to the message. "Dad, please just give me 5 minutes." It was Lucas, his voice hollow and defeated. Nothing like the entitled young man who had demanded $16,000 for a birthday party, while his mother's body was still warm in her grave. Against my better judgment, I called him back. "Morrison Park," I said when he answered. "Tomorrow at noon." It seemed fitting. Morrison Park was where I'd taught Lucas to ride a bike 30 years ago, where Margaret and I had taken him for picnics on summer evenings, where we'd been a family, before money and success and entitlement had corrupted the son we thought we'd raised right. As I hung up, I wondered what he wanted. More money, probably. Another chance. More empty promises. But it didn't matter what he wanted. This meeting wasn't for him. It was for me. And for Margaret's memory. A final conversation to close the circle, to end this chapter of grief and betrayal with clarity rather than bitterness. I looked at Margaret's photo on my desk. "I'll speak for both of us," I promised her. "One last time." He showed up at the park, looking like someone who had aged a decade. But I was no longer the same father he remembered either. I arrived early at Morrison Park, giving myself time to walk the familiar paths where our family's happier memories had been made. Fall leaves scattered across the ground, crunching beneath my feet as I made my way to the old bike trail where I'd taught Lucas to ride without training wheels 30 years ago. The air was crisp, carrying that distinctive autumn scent that Margaret had always loved. Standing there with my hands in my coat pockets, I watched and waited. At precisely noon, Lucas appeared on the path. I almost didn't recognize him. In just a few weeks, he'd transformed, thinner, hollow-eyed, with unkempt hair and stubble darkening his usually clean-shaven face. His clothes were wrinkled, his shoes mismatched. Nothing remained of the polished executive who'd strolled into Whitmore and Sons that final day. "Dad," he said, his voice hoarse. I nodded but said nothing. He shifted his weight, looking around at the park. "Thanks for meeting me." "What do you want, Lucas?" He launched into a rambling apology, words tumbling over each other as if he'd rehearsed this speech but was now forgetting the order. He told me he was working at Sam's Gas and Mart on the edge of town. Living in a room above the laundromat on Elm Street. Jenna had left him permanently. She was now living with her ex-boyfriend, the restaurant chain owner. "I've applied for 40 jobs," he said, his voice cracking. "No one calls back. No one even responds to the applications. It's like I'm blacklisted everywhere." I listened without interruption, my face betraying nothing of what I felt. "I know I screwed everything up," he finally said, breaking down. "I see it now. All of it. How I treated Mom. How I treated you. The funeral." His voice trailed off. When he finished, I remained silent for a long moment. Then I asked quietly, "When was your mother's birthday?" Lucas blinked, caught off guard by the question. "June 15th?" he guessed. I shook my head. "April 22nd. What was her favorite flower?" "Roses?" Another guess. "She loved daisies. You never paid attention to her, Lucas. Not to what mattered." He looked down, shame coloring his face, but it didn't last long. Within minutes his expression shifted, and I recognized the change immediately, the mask slipping, revealing the true purpose behind this meeting. "Look, Dad, I just need help. Just enough to get on my feet," he said, his tone sliding back into the familiar pattern of manipulation. "I know you have the money. It's not like it would hurt you to help your only son." "Still not about her," I said quietly. "Still about you." He tried emotional blackmail next. "Mom would want you to forgive me." I reached into my pocket and pulled out a worn page I'd torn from Margaret's journal, one of the last entries she'd written before the pain medication made her handwriting illegible. "She did forgive you," I said, handing him the page. "But she also knew who you were. I have her words right here." Lucas took the paper, his hands trembling slightly as he read. "What if we raised a child who doesn't know how to love? I hope he proves me wrong." Tears formed in his eyes as he read it, and for a moment, just a moment, I saw something genuine in his expression. A flash of real understanding, perhaps, of recognition. "She's right," he said quietly, handing the paper back. "I didn't love you. I loved what you gave me." We stood in silence, the weight of that admission hanging between us. "I've lost everything," he finally said. "You haven't lost everything," I replied. "You still have yourself. You'll find out whether that's enough." "So there's no going back?" he asked. "There might be, but not with words, only with change." Real change. I turned to leave, then paused. "Your mother believed in second chances, but she also believed people have to earn them." 1 year later, I visited Riverside Cemetery with a bouquet of daisies. Margaret's foundation had flourished beyond my expectations. 22 scholarships issued, $200,000 donated to cancer research, and a community garden project that had transformed an abandoned lot into something beautiful. "I've made peace with the boy we lost," I told her gravestone. "I've built something better in your name." That afternoon, I stopped at Morning Glory Diner for lunch, something I rarely did since Margaret's passing. As I walked in, I noticed Lucas behind the counter, wearing a stained apron, quietly taking orders from the breakfast crowd. Our eyes met across the room. "Hi, Dad," he said simply. I'm doing okay." "Good," I replied. "Sorry doesn't fix it, does it?" he asked. "No, but work might." I took a seat at the counter, and he poured me coffee without asking. It was a small gesture, but somehow it contained more consideration than he'd shown in years. Later that week, I met with Sarah Patterson, one of the scholarship recipients from Margaret's Foundation. A bright young woman studying nursing, inspired by her own mother's battle with cancer. She'd written a letter of thanks to the foundation. "Because of you, I will help others like someone once helped your family." That evening, I returned home and called Grace, a widowed volunteer I'd met at the foundation's gala. We talked about hosting students at the next fundraiser, about the garden project's expansion, about life's unexpected turns. After we hung up, I walked into the backyard and tended to Margaret's roses, now thriving again after nearly dying during her illness. The garden was coming back to life, just as I was. I thought about Lucas, about the humility I'd seen in his eyes at the diner. Not forgiveness yet. That would take more time. But acknowledgement, recognition of the damage done, and the work required to repair it. The next day, I placed the last daisy from my garden on Margaret's headstone. "Rest well, my love," I whispered. Justice was served. And so was your memory.